Jack's smile disappeared, replaced by a colder expression. "I'm not implying anything, sir, just making sure everything is fine." Joel could feel the stares of other customers around him. The tension in the room was heavy, and he knew where this was going. His heartbeat sped up, but he kept his composure. He had faced this kind of situation before and wasn't about to let it turn into a scene. "You can verify it," Joel said firmly. "I'm not leaving until you do." Jack's brow furrowed, and irritation flashed in his eyes. "Sir, I suggest you lower your voice." Joel started to respond, but before he could, Jack picked up the check again and folded his arms. He stepped back. "We'll need to take a closer look at this," he said, dropping the friendly act completely. He motioned toward the back of the bank. "Wait here for a moment. I'll be right back." Joel didn't like how things were unfolding. He glanced toward the entrance, noticing 2 security guards watching him closely. His heart raced, and frustration built up inside him. He knew exactly what this was about, and it wasn't just the check. Joel leaned on the counter, taking slow, deep breaths as he watched Jack walk away with the check. This wasn't over yet. As Jack disappeared into the back, the atmosphere in the bank felt heavy, filled with unspoken judgments. Joel tapped his fingers lightly on the counter, glancing at Angela, the teller. Her unease was obvious. Angela looked at him, offering a quiet, apologetic smile. "I'm really sorry. I've seen you here before, and I've never seen anything like this with your transactions." Though Joel appreciated her effort to ease the tension, it didn't change the situation. He gave her a brief nod, but remained silent, his attention shifting to the security guards near the entrance. One of them, tall and muscular, glanced in his direction before speaking softly into his walkie-talkie. The knot in Joel's stomach tightened. Time dragged on. The noise of the bank's customers faded into the background, becoming irrelevant to the tension Joel felt inside. Every moment that passed felt like more than just a delay. It felt like a challenge to who he was, like they were questioning more than just the check. The thought that his presence here could be doubted gnawed at him. Just as Joel was about to step forward again, Jack returned. His expression had changed. Gone was the polite mask. Now his face showed something colder, harder. He placed the check on the counter, but kept his hand on it as if to guard it. His eyes locked onto Joel's with a look of authority. "I've decided to handle this myself," Jack said, his voice steady but full of condescension. "Something about this check doesn't feel right to me." Joel's frustration flared, but he kept his tone controlled. He leaned in slightly and spoke firmly. "What exactly doesn't feel right about the check?" Jack's face remained unchanged. "I think you know what I mean," he replied, his words direct, but wrapped in a thin veil of suggestion. Joel's jaw tightened. "No, I don't. Why don't you explain it to me?" Jack exhaled slowly, his lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's not pretend, Mr. Avery. A check of this size, we have certain protocols for these kinds of situations." "What kind of situations?" Joel asked, his voice sharp now, his patience wearing thin. His fists clenched at his sides, though he kept his temper in check. Jack finally moved his hand off the check, but instead of returning it, he crossed his arms. "It's unusual for someone like you to bring in a check this big. We need to make sure it's not fake." Joel stared at him, his heart pounding and breath quickening. "Someone like you." He knew what that meant. He had heard it before, coded language with a clear message. "You're accusing me of fraud?" Joel asked, his voice calm but filled with anger. He couldn't believe how fast this was escalating. "I'm not accusing anyone," Jack said smoothly, though the slight smirk on his face told a different story. "I'm just saying, we need to be careful with large amounts of money. It's standard procedure, you know." "Procedure?" Joel said, shaking his head. "I've banked here for years. Check my records. I've never had an issue." Jack shrugged. "Things change, and so do our procedures. This check doesn't seem right." Joel stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "What doesn't seem right is how you're treating me like a criminal just for trying to deposit money that I earned." The atmosphere in the room grew heavier as the two men locked eyes. The rising tension caught the attention of other customers and bank staff. Angela shifted nervously behind the counter, clearly unsure of how to respond. Jack stood up straighter, his smile gone. "I suggest you calm down, Mr. Avery. There's no reason to get upset." "I'm not upset," Joel replied, his voice firm but rising. "I just want to understand why you're accusing me of something I didn't do." "I'm not accusing you," Jack said again, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But if you can't verify the source of this check, we'll have to involve the authorities." Joel's heart raced, his frustration reaching a boiling point. He felt the weight of the security guard's eyes on him, and every word Jack said carried judgment. It was a situation he knew all too well, being questioned and doubted simply for existing. "I don't need to verify anything," Joel said coolly. "The check is valid. Call the company if you need proof." Jack raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "That's not how we operate. We'll be holding on to the check for further investigation." Joel's hands clenched tightly, but he fought to stay calm. "You're not keeping the check. You're going to deposit it. Now." Jack's expression hardened. "If you keep acting like this, I'll have to call security to remove you." Joel glared at him, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'm not going anywhere until you deposit my check." A tense silence filled the air as they both stood still. Finally, Jack took a slow step back, raising his hand slightly as he glanced over Joel's shoulder. "Security," he said, his tone calm yet firm. Joel turned to see two security guards walking toward him, their faces unreadable. His heart raced, but he stood his ground. He wouldn't let them intimidate him. "I'm giving you one last chance to leave quietly," Jack said in a low voice. "If not, these men will escort you out." Joel took a deep breath, his hands shaking from frustration. This wasn't just about the check anymore. It was about always having to prove himself and justify his presence in spaces that saw him as less than. But he wasn't going to let them win. "I'm not leaving," Joel said firmly. "I'm staying right here until you do your job." Jack's eyes flashed with anger, and he nodded toward the guards. "Take him out." Before Joel could react, the guards grabbed his arms and pulled him toward the exit. His heart raced as he struggled against their hold, feeling humiliated as they dragged him out of the bank. Joel's voice rang out strong and clear. "You're going to regret this." Jack stood at the entrance, watching with cold satisfaction as they tossed Joel onto the sidewalk. The doors slammed shut behind him. Outside, Joel's chest rose and fell as he stood there, the summer heat making him uncomfortable. He adjusted his shirt and paced back and forth, still trying to understand what had just happened. People walking by glanced at him, but he didn't care. Anger and disbelief raced through his mind. How could something as simple as depositing a check turn into this? Inside the bank, he could see Jack through the large glass windows, standing near the entrance. The smug look on his face made Joel's blood boil. He wanted to storm back in and demand that his check be deposited, but he knew the security guards would be on him in seconds. Instead, Joel stood his ground outside the door, breathing deeply to calm himself. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, briefly glancing at the screen. It was a work message, something that suddenly felt trivial compared to the storm swirling inside him. He glanced back at the bank and caught the eye of Angela Ramirez, the teller who had originally tried to help him. She looked distressed, almost apologetic, but she was powerless to do anything. He could tell that she knew the situation was wrong, but there was only so much she could do against someone like Jack. Before Joel could decide his next move, the bank's door swung open and Jack stepped out. His polished shoes clicked on the pavement and he straightened his suit jacket, acting as though he owned the sidewalk just as much as he did the bank. "Are we still doing this, Mr. Avery?" Jack said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I thought we made it clear inside. Your check isn't being deposited until we verify everything. You can come back later if you want, but causing a scene out here isn't going to change anything." Joel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm, though his frustration was evident in every breath he took. This isn't about the check, and you know it. Jack raised an eyebrow, pretending to be innocent. Oh? Then what do you think this is about? You saw a black man walk into your bank with a big check and you decided there's no way it's real, Joel said, his voice calm but serious. That's what this is really about. Jack's face grew stern. Be careful with your words, Mr. Avery. I don't like being accused of something without any proof. There's no proof for the way you're treating me either, Joel replied. I came in to deposit a check, and now I'm being treated like a criminal. You're being treated according to our policies, Jack said smoothly. We have procedures for checking large amounts of money. You should understand that. Me, of all people, Joel repeated, his voice rising. You mean black people, don't you? Jack's eyes narrowed, but he stayed calm. Sir, you're making this about race, but it's not. I'm just following the rules. Rules that don't seem to apply when someone else brings in the same check, Joel shot back. I've seen people leave this bank with way more money, and you didn't bat an eye. Jack stepped closer, his eyes cold. I suggest you leave before things get worse. You're causing a scene, and I won't hesitate to call the police if this continues. The mention of the police sent a chill through Joel, but it only made him angrier. He wasn't going to back down, not after all this. I'm not leaving, Joel said firmly. Call whoever you want, but I won't let you treat me like this. Jack smirked, stepping back and crossing his arms. All right, if that's how you want it. Joel's heart raced as Jack slowly pulled out his phone and made a call. He could hear the faint ringing before Jack spoke. This is Jack Collins from First National Bank. We have a situation here. Someone refusing to leave after causing a scene. It's probably best if an officer comes to handle it. Joel stood there in disbelief, feeling his body tense. Jack gave him a smug look, as if daring him to react. It was clear the manager had been waiting for this moment, eager to put him in his place. After ending the call, Jack slipped his phone into his pocket and looked back at Joel. The police will be here soon, Mr. Avery. We'll see how this ends. Joel shook his head, anger and disbelief filling him. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Jack let out a quiet, smug laugh. We'll see about that. Joel began pacing, trying to calm himself down. He noticed people in the bank staring, some whispering, but no one stepped in to help. It felt like the walls were closing in, pushing him into a corner with no way out. Minutes passed, and soon Joel heard sirens approaching. His stomach tightened, but he stood tall. He wasn't going to let Jack or anyone else take away his pride. The sirens stopped, and Joel froze as a police car pulled up outside. 2 officers got out, one tall and broad, the other shorter with a tired expression. They walked toward him, their eyes already filled with suspicion. Joel stood still as the officers approached, feeling their eyes on him. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, wearing a smug expression like he had already won. Officers, Jack said smoothly, gesturing toward Joel. This is the man I told you about. He caused a disturbance inside the bank and refused to leave when we asked him multiple times. I'd appreciate it if you could take care of the situation. The taller officer, Daniels, looked Joel up and down, making Joel's stomach twist. Is that what happened? Daniels asked, his tone flat. Joel, trying to stay calm, but feeling the heat of frustration rising, responded quickly. No, that's not what happened. I wasn't causing any trouble. I came in to deposit a check, and this guy decided to accuse me of fraud for no reason. Daniels glanced at Jack, who simply shrugged. He's not telling the truth, Jack said in an eerily calm voice. We have rules for handling things like this, and he refused to cooperate. Joel's hands tightened into fists, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. The check is real, he said firmly. Call the company that issued it. They'll confirm everything. This is about him not believing someone like me could have that kind of money. Sir, can you step aside while we figure this out? Officer Daniels asked, his voice firm but not aggressive. Just stay calm. Joel clenched his jaw, the frustration clear in his voice. I asterisk am asterisk calm. It's him, he said, pointing at Jack, who's making this into something bigger than it is. Daniels didn't react, but his hand hovered near the radio on his shoulder. I'm asking you again, step away from the entrance. If you don't, we'll have to arrest you. Joel stared at him in disbelief. Arrest me? For trying to cash a check? Officer Green, who had been silent until now, took a step forward. You need to cooperate, or this will escalate. It's your choice. Joel looked around, feeling trapped. Jack stood by, smug as ever, while the officers were pressuring him to back down. He knew he couldn't win this fight. If he resisted, things would only get worse. With a deep breath, Joel raised his hands and stepped back. Fine, I'll move, but you all know this is wrong. Daniels nodded toward the sidewalk. Just wait over there, and don't make any sudden moves. Joel slowly backed away to where Daniels had pointed, frustration still burning inside him. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet he was being treated like a criminal just for standing up for himself. Jack stepped forward, still wearing that smug grin. Thanks, officers. I'm sure you'll handle this quickly. The officers ignored him, focusing on Joel. Daniels spoke into his radio, asking for backup, while Green moved closer, watching Joel as if expecting trouble. Joel stood still, fists clenched. The humiliation was unbearable. He could feel the eyes of people passing by, judging him. To them, he was just another black man causing a scene. They didn't know what really happened, and they probably didn't care. After what felt like forever, Daniels came back, expression unchanged. You're coming with us, he said plainly. Joel's eyes widened. For what? What did I do? Daniels didn't blink. The bank manager reported that you refused to leave and caused a disturbance. We'll figure it out at the station, but for now, you're being detained. I didn't do anything wrong. Joel's voice rose in disbelief. This is insane. Before he could say more, Officer Green stepped behind him and snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. Joel's heart pounded, but he tried to stay calm. Let's go, Daniels said, leaving no room for argument. As they led him toward the police car, Joel looked back at Jack one last time. The smug grin on the manager's face was still there, even stronger now, like he was enjoying every second. You'll regret this, Joel said, his voice low but filled with anger. Jack shrugged. We'll see. Joel was placed in the back of the police car, and the door slammed shut. As the car drove away, his mind raced with thoughts. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was sure this fight wasn't over. The ride to the police station was filled with silence. Joel stared out the window, his hands cuffed behind him, trying to process everything that had happened. He couldn't forget the image of Jack's smug face, the satisfaction in his eyes as Joel was taken away. It was a familiar look, one he had seen too often from people who doubted him and took pleasure in his struggles. When the police car arrived at the station, the officers led Joel inside. The bright lights and sterile smell made everything feel unreal, like he had entered a strange world where justice was a joke. Officer Daniels brought Joel to a bench in the processing area and told him to sit. Wait here, Daniels said in a cold, detached tone. Joel obeyed, his mind still racing. The cuffs hurt his wrists, but the humiliation felt worse. He watched as Daniels and Officer Green walked to a desk where a police sergeant sat, talking quietly. Joel couldn't help but overhear parts of their conversation. Words like fraud and disturbance drifted through the air, fueling his anger. It became clear that Jack had twisted the story to make himself look like the victim, and the police were believing it without question. Joel sat in silence, his frustration growing with each passing minute. He wanted to yell and make someone listen, but he knew that would only make things worse. He had to keep his cool and think clearly. Finally, Officer Daniels walked back in, holding a clipboard and some papers. He sat down across from Joel, looking at him with the same indifferent expression. We're going to take your statement now, Daniels said, flipping through the pages. You'll have a chance to share your side. Joel clenched his jaw. My side? I didn't do anything wrong. I went into the bank to deposit a check, and Jack decided I didn't belong there. Daniels barely blinked. The manager has a different story. He says you refused to leave and made a scene. Refused to leave? Joel's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. He accused me of trying to deposit a fake check. I didn't cause a scene. I was just defending myself from his lies. Daniels sighed, showing no sign of emotion. We'll contact the company that issued the check. If everything checks out, you'll be free to go. But for now, just calm down and let the process happen. Joel's fists clenched behind his back, anger bubbling up again. This is absurd. You're treating me like a criminal based on one man's word, and you haven't even tried to check the facts. We're checking now, Daniels replied in a flat tone. He looked over at Officer Green, who had returned to the desk and was already dialing a number on the phone. Joel took a deep breath to calm himself. He had to get through this. No matter how frustrating the situation was, he needed to stay calm. He hoped that once the company confirmed the check was real, this nightmare would finally end. As Officer Green made the call, Joel sat quietly, his thoughts racing. He wondered how many others had been in his shoes, people wrongfully accused, losing their dignity because someone judged them unfairly. He had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to be treated like this. Minutes went by, and Joel's heart raced as he watched Green on the phone, nodding and writing notes. Each second felt like forever, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. What if they found a way to blame him and keep him there longer? He couldn't shake the feeling that the odds were against him. Finally, Green hung up and walked over to Daniels, giving him the notes. Daniels read the paper, his face giving nothing away. The check is legitimate, Daniels said flatly. The company confirmed the payment was made to you for services rendered. Joel exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Relief washed over him, but anger still simmered in his chest. This never should have happened. So what now? Joel asked, bitterness in his voice. Daniels nodded to Green, who stepped forward and unlocked the handcuffs from Joel's wrists. You're free to go, Daniels said as if it were no big deal. If you need a ride home, we can arrange that. Joel rubbed his sore wrists and stood up slowly. That's it? After everything, I just walk out of here. Daniels didn't react. The check was real. You're not facing any charges. Joel looked at him, shocked. That doesn't change what happened. Jack lied, and you all believed him without a second thought. Daniels stayed silent, looking at the floor. There was no apology or acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done. Just silence. Joel shook his head. This isn't over, he said quietly as he walked past the officers and out of the station. He felt heavy, burdened by everything he had been through, but his mind was already racing, planning his next steps. He wasn't going to let this go, not this time. The next day, Joel sat on his couch staring at his phone. He couldn't stop thinking about the article he had just read. It was a small story, only a brief mention in a local news outlet, barely covering what had really happened. The bank's statement about investigating the issue didn't sit well with him. He knew how it usually went. They would release a statement, let the issue fade away, and Jack would keep his job, smug and unrepentant. That couldn't happen, not this time. His mind raced with ideas about what to do next. He had been through too much, taken to the police station, embarrassed in front of everyone at the bank, and forced to prove his innocence over a simple check. This was bigger than just him now. It was about making sure Jack Collins faced consequences for his actions, not only for his own dignity, but for others who might face the same unfair treatment. Joel grabbed his phone and went through his contacts. He thought of one person who could help, Rebecca Cole, a local investigative reporter known for covering stories about racial injustice. They had met once at a community event, where she had given him her card and told him to call if he ever had a story to share. Without thinking twice, Joel dialed her number. The phone rang twice before a clear, professional voice answered. Rebecca Cole speaking. Hi Rebecca, it's Joel Avery. We met at the... I remember you, Joel, she cut in, her tone warming. How have you been? Joel took a deep breath and jumped into the story. Not so good, actually. I'm dealing with something that I think you'd want to hear about. He told her everything that happened at the bank, how Jack Collins accused him of fraud, how security dragged him out, how the police got involved, and how, even after everything was proven false, the bank only made a weak promise to look into it. Rebecca listened closely, asking a few questions for clarification as Joel described the events in detail. By the time he finished, her voice was steady and resolute. Joel, this is a story that needs to be told. It's not just about a misunderstanding at a bank. It's about racism and abuse of power. I can have a crew meet you tomorrow morning to record your side of the story. Are you okay with being on camera? Joel paused for a moment. He knew that going public would be hard, but staying quiet felt even worse. I'll do it. I want people to know what happened. Good, Rebecca replied. I'll take care of everything. We'll make sure this story gets out. The next morning, Joel stood outside the bank where everything had happened. A camera crew was setting up nearby, and Rebecca was next to him, holding a notebook and quietly explaining what to expect during the interview. The morning sun shone off the bank's glass exterior, reflecting the place that had turned into a battleground for his dignity. When the camera started rolling, Joel shared his story again, this time for everyone to hear. He didn't hold back. He spoke about Jack Collins' hidden racism, how the fraud accusation was false, and how he had been taken to the police station without any real reason. He described the humiliation, the anger, and the undeniable feeling that he had been targeted just because of his skin color. Joel felt a mix of relief and determination as he left the bank after his interview with Rebecca. She had asked thoughtful questions, but it was his story that truly mattered. She promised him that the interview would be on the evening news and that they would push the story hard. That night, he settled in front of his TV, eager to see the report. Rebecca kept her promise. His face appeared on screen, and the story unfolded with footage of the bank, interviews from locals, and Joel sharing his experience. The response was swift. Within hours, social media exploded with calls for action. People demanded that the bank take responsibility using hashtags like #JusticeForJoel and #FireCollins. More news outlets began covering the story. The following morning, Joel's phone buzzed non-stop with messages. Friends, family, and even strangers reached out to show support and share their own experiences with discrimination. But one message caught his eye. A statement from the bank's corporate office. First National Bank does not tolerate discriminatory practices. We are reviewing the situation and have suspended Mr. Jack Collins while we investigate. We are dedicated to treating all customers with respect. We will take appropriate action based on our findings. Joel read the statement twice. It was a step forward, but it didn't go far enough. Suspension wasn't enough. He wanted Collins fired. He quickly texted Rebecca. Keep the pressure on. They're trying to wait this out. ****. By the end of the week, the bank had to respond again, this time more decisively. After our internal investigation, we have terminated Mr. Jack Collins's employment with First National Bank. We regret the incident and are taking steps to make sure this doesn't happen again. We apologize to Mr. Joel Avery and will provide additional training for all employees to prevent discrimination. Joel took his time reading the statement, letting each word settle in. Jack was gone, fired. His plan to embarrass Joel had completely backfired, and now he was facing public shame. This wasn't just a win for Joel. It sent a clear message to anyone who thought they could act like that without consequences. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a wave of satisfaction wash over him. He had fought back and come out on top. The news coverage continued, with Rebecca conducting a follow-up interview. She focused on the bank's decision and highlighted the larger issue of racism in institutions like it. The story had grown beyond just Joel's experience. It was now part of a bigger discussion. He knew there was still more to do and more challenges ahead, but for now, he let himself enjoy this moment of justice. Standing outside the bank, he looked at the same glass doors he had been thrown out of just a week earlier. This time, Everything felt different. The heavy burden of injustice was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. The fight had been tough and exhausting, but now he was returning on his own terms. Joel took a deep breath and opened the doors to the bank. The inside felt quiet, so different from the busy chatter that had filled the room when he first walked in. He could sense people looking at him, bank employees and a few customers who recognized him from the news, but it didn't bother him. Today was about finding closure. As he walked toward the counter, he saw him. Jack Collins, the former manager, standing by his desk in the corner with a cardboard box in front of him. Jack's face looked pale and defeated as he slowly packed up his things. The man who had once looked down on Joel was now reduced to this, packing up, powerless, his career in ruins. Joel approached the counter where Angela was standing. She seemed more relaxed than when he had last seen her, but her eyes widened a bit when she realized who had just entered. "Joel," she said, giving him a small smile that mixed warmth with apology. "How can I help you today?" Joel smiled back, but his attention was already on Jack, who had noticed him too. The manager's hands paused over the box for a moment, his eyes narrowing when they met Joel's. There was no escaping what had happened. Both men knew it. Joel approached the counter and said calmly, "I'd like to cash my check, the one I couldn't deposit last time." Angela nodded and quickly started the transaction. "Of course, I'll take care of that right away." He handed over the check, the same one that had started everything. Turning slightly, he faced Jack, who stood still, watching the scene unfold. The tension in the air was thick, and the other employees sensed it, keeping their heads down and acting like they didn't notice. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Joel stepped a little closer, keeping his eyes on Jack. "Well, look at you," Joel said casually, but with a hint of satisfaction. "Looks like you have your hands full." Jack's jaw tightened, but he maintained his gaze. "I'm packing up," he replied flatly. "I'm no longer with the bank." Joel looked at the half-packed box on the desk and nodded slowly. "I heard. Seems like accusing people of fraud without reason doesn't work out well for you." Jack's eyes flashed with anger, but he stayed calm. "I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Joel raised an eyebrow. "You mean humiliating me, throwing me out and calling the cops for no reason? That's how you define your job?" Jack's hands turned into fists at his sides. "I followed the rules." Joel leaned in a bit, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "No, you followed your own racist assumptions. And look where that got you. Packing up your desk while I cash this check." He let his words linger, watching Jack's face grow hard with bitterness. There was no need for Joel to yell or show off. Just seeing Jack without his power felt like a victory. "I warned you," Joel said calmly. "I told you this wasn't over. You should have listened." Jack's mouth twisted into a tight line. "You think this is a big win for you? You think you've changed anything?" Joel smiled, a small but sincere smile. "It's not about changing the world. It's about holding people like you responsible. And yes, this feels like a win to me." Angela came back to the counter, giving Joel a receipt and the cash for his check. "All done," she said softly, her voice showing a hint of satisfaction. She understood how important this moment was. Joel took the cash and put it in his pocket. "Thanks, Angela." He looked back at Jack one last time, his smile fading into a serious expression. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before assuming someone like me doesn't belong, if there even is a next time." With that, Joel turned and walked toward the exit, holding his head high. As he pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the sunlight, he felt lighter than he had in days. He had faced the man who tried to bring him down, and he had won. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had been in his position. Behind him, Jack Collins stood in the bank, finishing up his packing, knowing that he had fallen at the hands of the man he had tried to ruin. Weeks passed since Joel's last visit to the bank. The chaos around the incident had calmed down. The media had moved on to other stories, and although Joel still got messages of support now and then, life continued. Sitting on the front porch of his house, Joel watched the sunset, painting the neighborhood in warm golden light. He sipped his coffee, a way to relax after another long day at work. The heavy feeling he had carried since that day at the bank had lifted, but the memory remained. A reminder of how fragile dignity can be in the face of power. Joel looked at his phone and saw a news article about the bank's new anti-discrimination policies. They had to act fast, training all employees and reviewing their procedures. The bank's reputation was damaged, and they were rushing to make things right. But for Joel, this was about more than just policies or corporate apologies. It was about something deeper that he had always known, but had to face directly. The world wasn't always fair, especially to people like him. He had always seen the obstacles, the quiet judgments, and the assumptions about what he could and couldn't achieve. But now, after everything he had been through, he felt stronger and more confident in his place, in a world that sometimes tried to push him away. He remembered the moment he stood face to face with Jack Collins in the bank. He had always known that men like Jack existed, men who preferred to see him fail rather than succeed, who judged him harshly just because of the colour of his skin. But for once, Joel had flipped the script. He stood his ground, fought back, and walked out with his dignity. It hadn't been easy. There were times when he thought about walking away and letting it go. But he didn't. He pushed on. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. In the end, it had been worth it. It wasn't just that Jack had been fired. Joel had shown the world, and himself, something important. It wasn't about the check or the bank. It was about standing up for himself and refusing to let anyone else decide his value. Joel took another sip of his coffee, enjoying the warmth spreading through him. He felt stronger and more confident in who he was and what he could achieve. He knew there would be more battles ahead. This wouldn't be the last time someone tried to put him in a box or tell him he didn't belong. But now he understood that he had the strength to push back every time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Joel stood up and enjoyed the cool breeze around him. He slipped his phone into his pocket, letting go of the news article's words and thoughts. There was always more work to do and challenges to face. But tonight he decided to take a break. He had fought hard in his recent battle, and he had come out victorious. For now, that was all he needed to feel content. What a remarkable story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Until then, bye.